News out of Manchester today is that Savinho is reportedly on the move out of City and headed to Spurs, while Manchester City are trying to replace him with Rodrygo from Real Madrid. And honestly, I'm not sure where these moves have come from. We haven't really heard any noise about Man City selling any of their attackers, and if anything, it almost felt like their attacking line was relatively set going into the new season. Haaland, Doku, Cherki, Foden, Marmoush, and Savinho. If anything, the guy I almost thought was on the way out was Oscar Bob, who since last season suffering that devastating injury in preseason, I've almost felt has had his momentum kind of halted. I'm a big fan of Oscar Bob. I'm a big fan of his talent. I think he's a real player, but it did almost feel like that amazing form he was kind of going into last season with had really taken a halt because of that injury. And going into this season, I felt he was the odd man out in terms of getting minutes in this front line. But no, it actually appears that it's Savinho who is keen on this move. Apparently, Savinho himself is very open to joining Spurs. And it appears that Savinho will be the one making way, almost allowing Oscar Bob back into the rotation. Now, first and foremost, why does Savinho want to leave City? Because apparently he is keen on this move. I'm not really too sure. I mean, was Savinho's first season at the club an overwhelming success? Perhaps not. Still finished with double-digit assists if you want to really take much stock into that. But overall, I thought it was what you would really expect from a young player. The guy's 21 years old, playing his first season in England, and playing for a City team that, first and foremost, are undergoing a rebuild, had really bad patches of last season, and are rotating a lot. So it's very difficult, I think, for any young player to come into that kind of team and immediately stake his claim and immediately kind of find his best form. So all things kind of taken into context, I think Savinho's first season at the club was decent. He played a lot for a young player. He actually played a decent amount. It did appear that Pep did like him as well too. And I don't really think that leaving should be the biggest thing on his priority. However, do I think a move to Spurs would really suit him? Yes, I do. I think Spurs are obviously a good team. They're a good club. They're a big club. They're playing in the Champions League. And the chance to go to Spurs and be a bigger player in that team, be a player that has more responsibility, probably play a little more, does exist. That is definitely a reality that I see happening. However, I guess he's not forcing a move, right? But entertaining moves away from City, I do feel has the potential to kind of backfire. Because first and foremost, City are very happy to let this guy go. City are more than happy to let most players go if they want to leave. That has been Pep's USP since he's come to the club. If a player doesn't want to stay at the club, he's allowed to leave. The only one that apparently that rule doesn't stand for is Bernardo Silva. But if you want to leave, Pep's not going to stand in your way. But for Savinho, I do feel like it is maybe a bit rash. I think another season at the club probably would have suited him well. And I think he would have improved from last season, even though I don't think last season was a bad year. Now, Savinho at Spurs. What do I think of that move? I think it suits him, and I actually definitely think it suits Spurs as well too. Now, Spurs are kind of stockpiling a lot of young, talented wingers, attackers at the club at the moment, whether it's Odobert, whether it's Matthias Tell, whether it's Mikey Moore, who of course has gone on loan, whether it's Kudus, who I still consider a young player, 24, 25 years old, and now they want to bring Savinho to the club. So it is a lot of youth, it is a lot of talent, it's a lot of potential, but no one that's really kind of at the level immediately ready to stake a claim and be the guy that is delivering week in and week out for Spurs. I feel like all of those players are kind of at a similar stage in their development where they're going to give you flashes, they're going to give you moments, but it's going to be inconsistent because, newsflash, they're young players. But do I think this is a good move for Spurs? Absolutely. You're adding quality in a position where I think you're missing some. I think Savinho is a very talented player. I think he's quick. I think he's expressive. I think he's got a bit of flair to him. He's got a bit of skill to him, trickery, can whip a ball in, has an eye for the audacious, creative. I think Savinho is a talented player. And I think that if Spurs get him, they will believe that they can help his development into becoming the player that I think a lot of us believe he can be, which is a damn good Premier League player if he isn't already that at the moment. So for Spurs, I completely get it. And although I think Savinho probably should stay another year at City, I still think going to Spurs will be good for him. Because I think you're still playing at a good level, and I think you're going to have a bit more responsibility and a bit more probably freedom to kind of be one of the main guys on the team. Whereas City, I always feel like players of that level, you are restricted to being a cog in the system. So that's the Savinho side of things, and that's the Spurs side of things, right? But what about from a City point of view? Where does this kind of leave them? Well, apparently it leaves them in a pretty damn good position. Because to replace Savinho, Pep Guardiola, Hugo Viana, and Man City have identified Rodrygo as his potential replacement. And I mean, what a replacement. Some of you guys might know, I'm a big fan of Rodrygo. I think this guy is a really good player. And I think he's a player that is almost waiting to explode to the next level. I think he's a good player right now. I think he can take the next step in a different kind of setup, at a different club, in a different environment, under a different coach. I think his talent level is really, really good. Now, with Rodrygo, I think a lot of people look at his statistics, his base numbers, black and white numbers, goals and assists, and just look at the other great wingers around Europe and automatically think, well, his numbers are a lot worse than theirs, therefore he's a lot worse than they are. But you guys know where I stand on with GA. I think GA a lot of the time is circumstantial. I think it depends on a lot of things more so than if you're just a good player or not. I think it depends on where you're playing, how you're being set up to play, the manager you're playing under, the kind of tactical setup you're playing with, who you're playing alongside. And I think all of the things that I just mentioned have not been in Rodrygo's favor for the last 4 or 5 years at Real Madrid. Now, despite that, he's put up performances that have actually been at a pretty good level. And it's not like Rodrygo doesn't put up numbers. It's not like he doesn't score or assist ever. But I think he is capped at how productive he can be because of everything around him. The biggest thing for me is the fact that for the last 4 or 5 years, Rodrygo has been shoehorned into a right winger at Real Madrid. The problem is, Rodrygo is a left-sided player. Rodrygo's best work comes coming off the left. His best performances at Real Madrid have been when Vinicius isn't available or when Mbappe is not available, and Rodrygo is the one coming off the left, linking up play, creating for others, driving into the box. That's when we've really seen the best of Rodrygo. The problem is, he plays at a football club where arguably 2 of the best left wingers in world football also play there, and that's Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. So because of that, Rodrygo more often than not ends up playing on the right as a touchline winger. And again, I think he does a decent job of it. I think he's put in some huge performances over the years. He's been a big player, especially in the Champions League. But again, he has kind of just been a side act to Vinicius Jr. or a side act to Karim Benzema or a side act to Kylian Mbappe this season. He has been the guy that I feel has to sacrifice his best level for others to thrive. And look, you got to do what you got to do for the success of the team. And Real Madrid have been very successful at doing so. And I'm sure Rodrygo wouldn't change anything over the last few years because look at what he's won because of the way he's played. But in terms of fulfilling his individual potential as an individual player, I've always been of the belief that Rodrygo is one transfer away from going from a good player to a player we consider when we talk about the best wingers in world football. The way we talk about Saka, Kvaratskhelia, Vinicius, all of these guys, right? I think Rodrygo can very easily at a different club sit at that level. I'm not saying he can be better than them, but that remains to be seen. He has to also now take that on himself. But his talent level, I don't see why Rodrygo at a different club, under a different manager, in a different role, can't be seen as one of the best wingers in the world, if he's not already seen as that. Now, all season long, and in fact for the last 2 years, I've been saying I think a move to Arsenal makes the most sense for all parties. Because Rodrygo wants to play off the left, and Arsenal have a massive gaping hole, in my eyes, at that left wing position, where they're lacking X factor, they're lacking creativity, they're lacking individual quality at an elite level. And that's all things I think Rodrygo provides. And this summer, it just felt like it was destined to be. Real Madrid, Alonso has come in, Rodrygo was effectively exiled from the starting 11, from the squad basically, all Club World Cup. He started the first game and then barely played the rest of the tournament. So many games were just left on the bench flat out. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is the summer where Arsenal need the left winger. They're really pushing for one. Real Madrid have effectively made Rodrygo available for Europe. Make it happen. And instead, they've gone for Madueke. We'll talk about Arsenal in a little bit. Liverpool are also linked to the guy. I think Liverpool are focusing that amount of funds on Isak, so that doesn't seem realistic. Bayern definitely need a left winger. Went after Nico Williams, settled on Luis Diaz instead, but maybe if it wasn't for the fee that Real Madrid wanted, they would have ended up with Rodrygo. But alas, 100 million euros is Real Madrid's asking price. And now we're left with City, a club that, again, now have an open position in their attack, but also have a lot of players in that role. Doku, Cherki, Foden, Bob, Marmoush, all those guys can kind of occupy those wing positions on either side. But I'm sorry, Rodrygo can easily come to Manchester City and immediately on day one make himself the best winger at the club. In my eyes, there's no reason why he can't do that. I see Rodrygo coming to Manchester City and elevating his game so much under Pep Guardiola, coming off the left, that he will be one of the signings of the season. Now, a player I compare to Rodrygo all the time, not in terms of their profiles or how they play the game. I think they're completely different players, despite being wingers. But a player who was in a similar situation to Rodrygo and completely changed his career and reputation around was Alexis Sanchez. Alexis Sanchez was a great player. At Barcelona, he was a good dude. Like he came in big games, he'd score goals, he goes in and out of the side. but he never managed to stake his claim as a consistent guy in that team. He was always in and around the squad, in and around the 11. He came to Arsenal, which there's no problem, is a lower stage than Barca. There's less competition, and became the main man overnight and immediately became seen as one of the best players in the world. I think Rodrygo can do similar. And it's different because Man City, Real Madrid, they're a lot closer than what Arsenal and Barca were those days, right? But I truly believe Rodrygo at Manchester City will be seen in a completely different light because I believe in this guy's talent massively. Now, 100 million euros, that's the asking price around what? 75, 80 million pounds. It's a lot of money. That's the market these days. And if you're getting 50 to 60 from Savinho and you're able to kind of chip that in to whatever you're spending on Rodrygo, I think that's great business because Rodrygo is without a doubt an immediate upgrade on Savinho, without a doubt. And I think he's an upgrade on most of City's wingers. City have been missing a marquee, world-class winger since they sold Riyad Mahrez. And even Mahrez towards the end, was he world-class at that point? He was in and out of the squad. We're talking like the season before that maybe, or Sterling or Sané. They haven't really had a winger of that level since those guys. Don't give me Jack Grealish. I like Jack Grealish, right? He never hit the level of those guys when he was at Man City. He had that 1 year in the treble where he was a piece of the puzzle. But for the money they spent, he never came close to really reaching that height. Rodrygo is, in my eyes, would be the first player since Mahrez that Man City signed in that position that honestly is that caliber of player. He comes to Man City, and I think the entire Premier League is looking at him in a different way. And it might be the kind of move that puts City back on the top. Because right now, I look at City, and I think they have really talented players. Haaland is the best goal scorer on earth. Rodri, when he plays, is the best midfielder damn near on earth. They have great players. They have Pep Guardiola. But I do feel like they are missing that elite level talent across the squad that they did a few years ago when you had De Bruyne, you had Rodri, you had Bernardo, you had Gundogan. They still have them, but different versions of them, right? You had Haaland, you had Mahrez, you had Ruben Diaz, John Stones. The squad was littered with the best players in the league. And when I look at City this year, they have very talented players, but I think they're kind of in the midst of a rebuild. I think there's players that have the potential to get to that level, but are clearly a few years away from doing so, despite still having Haaland, Rodri, and I would throw Gvardiol in that realm as well too. I think Gvardiol is one of the best players in the league for sure. So it's a great team. I think they need to move on from a few older players, but I think there's a few guys that are just a few years away from getting there. And when you look at Liverpool, have so many world level players, it's very difficult to kind of stack up the two teams. I think you add guys like Rodrygo to this side, and City, in my opinion, look a whole lot more dangerous. Because I personally think this guy comes in and is immediately one of the best players in the league. I love Cherki. I love Doku. I love those guys. But I think there's still question marks on a game-to-game basis. Are you going to get a consistent level of production? Are you going to get top performances week in, week out? I think with those two, there is still Oscar Bob similar. They're young players. I think they're unbelievable talents. But on a week-to-week basis, how much can you rely on them? I think Rodrygo comes to Manchester City, and on day one, Pep Guardiola wraps his arm around him and makes him one of his guys. And I think that's a scary sight for the rest of Europe. I think it is. This is a very interesting transfer saga, one that I don't think anyone saw coming. Savinho leaving City, potentially joining Spurs. How does Spurs look like after that? How much of a player does that make them? And Man City with Rodrygo. Is this the piece that takes them from contenders to potential champions? I think they need a whole lot more after that. I don't even think it's players that City need. I think they need to get rid of some of this deadwood, trust some of the younger players, enough of this Gundogan, Kovacic experiment, man. Seriously. I don't think they can hack it in terms of the consistent intensity of the Premier League week in, week out. I think in transition, City are a little vulnerable, but going forward, this is arguably the scariest team in the league. I know Isak is on the verge of joining Liverpool. That's a problem in its own right. Those two teams are a problem. And now finally, Arsenal. If you let Rodrygo go to Manchester City, and your answer to that, not even an answer, because an answer is something you reply to something with. You signed Madueke when Rodrygo was available. I like Madueke. I'm sorry, guys. That is mind-blowing to me. This might blow up in my face, right? Madueke might end up being a revelation for Arsenal. Rodrygo might not. He might end up being at City just what he was at Real Madrid, just a piece of the puzzle. I don't think he will be. But I'm sorry. If Rodrygo becomes everything we think he can be at City and more, and Arsenal decided to go for Madueke instead, in a year where they had to win the league, had to go above and beyond, had to kind of get over the finish line, that is going to be a massive, massive, massive red flag for Arsenal. I'm sorry, man. A player of this caliber, 6 months after Kvaratskhelia was available and you decided to look away. The left-hand side has been crying out for world-level talent. And in the space of 6 months, you've potentially seen Kvaratskhelia and Rodrygo become available. And you effectively said, nah, I'm good. you better win the league. That's all I'm saying, man. If you're too good for Rodrygo, then you better win the league. Big pressure on Arsenal this season. I think they should have gone for him. But guys, let me know what you guys think. Rodrygo to Man City. What do you think this means for City? What do you think this means for Rodrygo? What do you think this means for the Premier League? And how will Savinho do at Spurs? Let me know that in the comment section below. Like, share, subscribe. We're almost at 80K. And I'll see you guys very, very soon. Peace.